You're listening to Backbench Drivers. I'm your host, John Lawson, and joining me today as well, I have the now infamous John MacGowan. He has joined us twice in the past, and he's on a crazy run at the moment, generational run, some are saying, with his appearances on podcasts and media in general. I caught your appearance on the Into the Weeds podcast, John, and that was awesome. That was fantastic. And I didn't get
That was
very
really
far
fun.
into your
Yeah.
other one either. You had who was it? The Paul guy, Fred Paul. I didn't get
Fred
far into
Paul,
it, but
yeah.
I'll finish that one off.
Fred's a really interesting guy. He's ex ADH TV and,
Mm.
definitely kind of intellectually aligned with our side of politics. So that was quite pretty fun. A bit more serious in tone than the Into the Weeds one. But
Well, you turned me
yeah.
onto the Into the Weeds podcast. I've been binge listening to it since then, and they've got some awesome episodes. The guy's a great interviewer.
Yeah, yeah, he's arguably a better podcast host than he is MP. But he's a really fun guy and has quite an interesting kind of story coming from kind of leaving the Greens in disgrace and then starting, well, really rejuvenating the legalized cannabis party. And he does really good work in the New South Wales Parliament, but I think, maybe he should commit himself to podcasting. Funnily enough, that one's not monetized because it's all taxpayer funded because he's using his electoral allowance for all the gigs.
Right.
So it's great. It's ad free. It's every time you tune in.
Well, yeah, I've been going through the episodes. I listened to the Glenn Drury run. That one was fascinating.
Drew was good. He was on right before me. Even the Friendly Geordies one I thought was really interesting because
I haven't got around to it, but I'll have to.
Yeah, because it was kind of like, it's rare that Geordies does an interview where he breaks character. Like he was just Jordan Shanks. He was a bit less annoying to listen to for an hour in that one.
Yeah. And then there was the Latham one. That was a bit more combative. It was funny. I was talking to my mate about your appearance on the podcast, and he was saying it was funny because you've got this ostensibly, left-wing sort of former Greens guy,
Yeah.
legalized cannabis guy, and you're talking about like, racism is, it's kind of, you'd expect it, or whatever he said. And the guy was just nodding and like, yeah, no, that's true. He was sort of agreeing with you.
Buckingham and I have been friends for a really long time though, and weird thing, we actually he's about 10 years older than me, and we grew up next door to each other in Hobart. Oh, sorry, not in Hobart, down in Eaglehawk Neck. We lived next door to each other. So, yeah, he was exactly the same back then as he is now. He just had his hair as long as mine.
Yeah, I suppose you look a bit more like the typical legalized cannabis member than he does.
Yeah,
in some
exactly.
ways.
Yeah, I'm definitely look like I'm more in their wheelhouse. But well, actually, I'm going on again in about 2 weeks, and the purpose of that one is we're actually going to have a bit of a debate about cannabis, because that is one thing where Jeremy and I just are diametrically opposed. And having seen the rollout of medicinal cannabis over the last two and a half years. I think it's like a massive failure that's, going to really damage people in the long run, as well as damage, just the credibility of our pharmaceutical benefits scheme and things like that. So, I think that's going to be interesting. That will probably get a bit more heated because obviously he has very strong views on legalizing cannabis. Yeah.
Well, anyone that has, I saw it was a funny edit that pointed it out, but cannabis users have to be the most insecure drug users of all time. If you criticize their drug of choice, they will always throw up a massive argument and have a fit about it. They'll have all these copes about how it's actually more productive and this artist uses it to be more creative.
Yeah.
And then you compare that with like Coke users, and they'll be they'll be in a banking firm and they'll laugh about how the effects of it and whatnot. But
it's such an easy argument to win though, because you just say, okay, well, quit for a week. Like it's not even like with other drugs where you could say quitting cold turkey permanently is really difficult. I mean, even hardcore alcoholics can go a few days without a drink. Just say to particularly these people who are on the new prescriptions, just say go for 48 hours without using it and see what happens. And the fact that the government, supports this regime, that they've, introduced laws to enshrine it in law. It's quite worrying, and it's going to be years before we see the full impacts of it. Although, I think younger people in particular are seeing the impacts of it live, where, a whole generation is just tuning out and, just smoking incredibly high potency medicinal cannabis, like it's bushweed from the 1990s, and then getting one-shotted by it. So, I think that's going to be an interesting debate. But
Yeah, well, I'll fall on your side for that one, and
I think most
I look
people won't.
forward to it.
Yeah.
But I suppose we should probably at some point move on to the main topic of our discussion, which is the upcoming 2025 federal election and what that is going to mean for the future of Australia, at least for the next 3 or 4 years. So we'll sort of launch right into it. I think right off the bat, let's get your prediction. Who do you think is going to win out of Dutton or Albo?
Oh, it's too close to call. Like, if there was a gun to my head, I would say Labor minority with the biggest shit show of a hung parliament in Australian history, or even in just the history of Westminster parliaments. I mean, there is no way that Labor will pass up going back into government if it means negotiating with the Greens. They say it every time. They say, no, we're not going to do deals with the Greens, but it's nonsense. They will absolutely do them. The Greens are standing there, extending the hand, saying that, we're intending to keep Dutton out of office and keep you honest. I mean, that's essentially their entire campaign pitch. So, with that in mind, and with the massive reduction, well, not massive reduction, but but is still like a historic reduction in the two-party primary, which was at 68.2 in the last news poll. It's now sitting around 67, 66. I think that's going to be a very hard slog for Dutton, especially when his campaign really doesn't have much to rally around at this point. So, I'd predict a Labor minority with the Greens effectively holding the balance of power. I think that's... I've spoken to a lot of people about this in the last couple of weeks. It seems that that's what a lot of the third-party campaigns supporting the Liberals are trying to head off, is the Greens controlling the balance of power in the Senate. I don't know how well that's going to go. I don't think any of that content's particularly good. So right now, I think that's where it's going to land. I mean, if you think about the major issues for the right, the biggest of which being immigration, the funny thing is, 3 more years of Labor and the Greens versus 3 years of Dutton over 5 years, I think, would see a lower rate of immigration, for the simple reason that Labor are going to make no changes. We're going to see, between 500,000 more migrants pumped into the country every year for the next 3 years if they win. But at the end of that 3 years, whatever right-wing alternative emerges, or whatever happens if the Liberals were to ever get their shit together, is going to result in net zero immigration in 3 years. Whereas 3 years of Dutton, with his anemic 25% reduction, his inability to cap Indian arrivals, and the fact that he's just unwilling to do anything on tertiary education, I would say over 5 years you'd see more if Dutton gets in. So,
Simply because it wouldn't create a genuine alternative, are you saying?
Yeah. It's gonna. I think Dutton winning will put the pursuit of a legitimate right-wing alternative back at least a year or so, as people try and figure out what he's going to be all about. What we saw is this one of the most interesting starts to an election I think we've seen in a long time, because we had this accidental budget, the budget that we weren't meant to have, the budget that was meant to be cancelled so that he could announce the election probably for early to mid-April. But Cyclone Albert, previously Cyclone Anthony, came in on top of it and prevented them from doing it. So you've got a really interesting, well, it's not an interesting budget, it's just a kind of novelty budget where there's nothing in it because they had no time to put anything into it. They had no time to consult stakeholders, no time to go out to the backbench, find projects they might want to support. There's really nothing in there. The Liberals' reply has the same level of rigour. I mean, there's nothing in there either. Nothing that Labor's not already doing, particularly on things like foreign home ownership. No more clarity on their big nuclear policy. So we still don't know anything about how much that's going to cost, how long it's going to take.
I know you've been a skeptic of that actually from Dutton's proposed nuclear policy. With you've been quite critical of that from all of your media appearances, from what I've seen.
Oh, 100%. I am really critical of it because I'm a huge supporter of the transition to nuclear energy. I want to see Australia have a working nuclear reactor and a working nuclear industry. I just think this is the complete wrong way to go about it. To present to the electorate a proposal with no meat on its bones, where it is, well, it's centrally occupied with two things. It's centrally occupied with keeping the coal industry afloat during the transition, which which might have been a perfectly fine thing to do in Australia 2 to 3 years ago, to phrase it that way. But I mean, we now have Donald Trump walking away from the Paris Agreement. I mean, we now have coal-fired power stations back on the menu in a dozen countries. So this idea that he has to do it that way is kind of ludicrous. So then it's really about the politics, where there's this massive uncertainty about the electoral implications of building like large-scale nuclear energy facilities. So he's split them up into really untried and untested these small reactors, which he's saying he's going to put in 7 different areas. To just kind of spread the pain out a little bit. I don't think that's a smart thing to do. The smartest thing to do would have been just to build one between 1.3 to 1.5 gigawatts in New South Wales. Would have been the smartest thing to do. And the reason that's a smart thing to do is because out of all the states, New South Wales the New South Wales electorate consistently shows the best engagement with the disruption of heavy infrastructure development. They're the people who can most be persuaded on the benefits of it. And we've just seen that time and time again, where, successive Liberal governments have shut down whole sections of the city while we built trams or light rail, shut down the rail network while we've built the metro. And people can see how good that infrastructure is. It takes, I think the metro took almost 9 years to build, but they can see the benefits of it. So, and I think so. New South Wales would have been the natural place to do it. And even if you had to lose one seat to pull it off, I think it would have been much smarter than doing it this way. And just the fact now, we're in the opening of the election, he's had the best chance to explain how he was going to fund it and explain how it was going to look by putting it into his budget reply, and he didn't do that. And I think that's really a kind of sign of what we're going to see through the whole campaign, which is just no effort spent on detail at all. This is going to be a vibes-based election where they play around the edges of things and just hope that people's natural political alignments and their antipathy towards the system in general will carry the day, along with a higher than expected alternative party vote, which the Libs, I think, are going to sink a lot of money into ensuring they're the beneficiary of, which makes things, I think, if you're voters like us who are sitting there critical of everyone and desperate for a right-wing alternative, it makes how you vote quite vexed, because there aren't a lot of ballots where you're going to be able to actually send these guys a real message. So it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out and how the public engages with it, because they're certainly not engaged now. I don't think anyone's really paying that much attention.
Well, there's a lot to dig into there. I want to jump back to something that you mentioned earlier in terms of Dutton's win pushing back the formation of a genuine right-wing alternative. I have to say maybe I disagree with that, simply because Dutton is the first Liberal leader in a while to even suggest marginal immigration cuts, that aren't illegal immigration. And he is also seen as one of the most right-wing leaders the Liberals have had in recent history. People consider him to the right of Abbott. Really, that's not based on anything except,
No,
I guess, media scaremongering. I don't think at his heart he's anything better than like Abbott leaves a lot to be desired. And then you've got Dutton, who I suppose the only reason is because he has that sort of that military surrounding him, that sort of vibe to him. And that he's very much like the deep state candidate. He does look kind of cold and merciless, and I suppose that's why people assume that he's more right wing. Nonetheless, I do think him winning would allow the Liberals to consider stepping further to the right and opening up to more right wing candidates. Simply because if he loses, then they're going to say, well, the reason was because, he was too right wing. We got to find someone who's a bit softer, someone who's got a family that they can chuck in front of the camera, something like that. And I don't know, that's what I take away from it, that him winning would open the Liberals up to considering even further immigration cuts, maybe a further right leader or further right candidates, maybe even working with the minor parties more. I don't know, that's what I'm taking away from
Yeah,
it, but what do you think?
you definitely could be right. I mean, you're definitely right insofar as that, he has this perception of being extremely right wing, but there's no real evidence of him ever being particularly right wing. When he was health
People
minister,
have to point all the way back to him walking out of the Aboriginal apology and him being a Queensland cop and stuff like that. That's
which so and like the Queensland Police, I mean, I don't think any police force is on an ideological spectrum at all. There's a great story this week about how in Brisbane, the Brisbane City Council have issued all these move-on orders to homeless people who are sleeping in parks. So the Queensland Police are refusing to actually execute them. And so the problem's just growing. And, you look at that and think, oh, yeah, are the Queensland Police particularly that right-wing? Probably not. Dutton's whole kind of perception about being right-wing has been forced on him by the media. And it's something that they've done to every Liberal leader other than Malcolm Turnbull, really. It's just like a standard practice now to target these guys and say, sorry, my dog's going. Okay, I'm back. Sorry. I thought someone was here.
No worries.
Yeah, so there's this kind of vibe that Dutton is, extremely right-wing that doesn't really have much in reality to back it up. He's just... There's a really good piece, I think it was in the City Morning Herald or The Age, the Fairfax Press, from last week, a little kind of, backgrounder on Dutton, where they got extensive commentary from Christopher Pyne, who was in there saying, yeah, you don't realise in cabinet, around the cabinet table, he was never that right wing. He never really espoused a lot of these views. He's had these really ham-fisted attempts at, grabbing the perception that he's, Australia's incarnation of Trump. They've all backfired. The limp-wristed comment that he had the other day that he was forced into an embarrassing back down on within, I counted it was 40 minutes.
That's
from when
so gay. That is so that's so limp-wristed.
I know, right? So, I watched the clip. It was actually kind of hard to find the clip of him saying it. And when you see him, it's not like an organic thing that he says. It's not like this is a term that Dutton uses a lot that slipped out and then, he's then apologized for it. This is something he deliberately went in there wanting to say something antagonistic, wanting to say something Trump-like. And then he's walked away, and then there's been this... It's purely a mainstream media backlash. And then he's apologized straight away. So, anyone who agreed with the comment now thinks he's a loser. And all the people who didn't like the comment, they're not going to change their vote. So what was the point of that whole exercise? And I tweeted this the other day that I think this is going to be a real feature of the campaign, kind of like how the Trump shadow is being cast over Australia, because you saw it again with Labor when Labor came out and did their ad on Instagram with the T-shirt, the edited Australian nationalist T-shirt that said, we drink beer and whatever, and we I think they changed it to say we support Medicare. And again, within hours of doing it, I think it was Cameron Wilson, was one of the usual suspects, had run down the fact that it was the design of an Australian nationalist T-shirt that was in some Australian National Museum, and Labor have backed down and apologised, right? And so I think this is going to keep happening. It's great for the minor parties because particularly it's great for the few kind of interest, like the guys who do antagonism well, and like Babbitt is probably the only one I think who kind of consistently does it well. It's unfortunate that Babbitt doesn't have much to say, really. But he does do the best Trump impersonation out of everyone we've got.
True.
And you think well, Babbitt wouldn't apologise for something like that. So yeah, I think that's
image
going to
that
be
Babbitt posted. Do you remember a while ago? He posted that image of it had Trump, Andrew Tate, someone else, and himself. And that image
Yeah.
echoes in my subconscious, so
Yeah.
I can't escape it. It's just so
This is and
funny.
this is a really it's a really interesting thing though, because like what the media seem to think that the Trump crown globally can just be bestowed by them, that they can just say, oh, you're the Trump, like, and to be a part of like the emerging reactionary culture is something that they get to decide. But it's not like that at all. And the people who get it, whether it's Trump, JD Vance is a really good example of this. These are people who are actually immersed in online right-wing culture and understand it. Like, remember right at the beginning of the US campaign, people were going through the people that JD Vance followed and criticizing him for it, because it turned out that, yeah, he really was listening to what, our guys kind of say. And Babbitt does the same thing. Jared Rennick does the same thing. And so for like the Liberal Party campaign, who aren't immersed in that kind of thing, who don't really understand it, to try and come along and adapt it to, get 4 to 5% of the vote, it's just failing so abysmally because they don't understand it. It's like watching, your granddad try and use a meme. Like, it's just not, it just doesn't work for them. So, yeah, I don't think things are going to go so well for them on that front. I mean, the smartest thing you can do in politics is just to be authentic. And, I think Dutton would probably have a much easier time just being himself, which is this quite boring, Liberal Party politician who's been a part of Liberal furniture now for 20 years, who's supported every Liberal policy apart from some stuff around even on things like net zero and things like that. Like he never split from cabinet solidarity on any of the moderates' major decisions. He's just an ordinary Liberal Party politician, and I think if he presented himself like that, he'd probably do a lot better. And you probably might be able to suppress a little bit of the drift from his own people to going to the minor parties, because right now he just looks like he's all over the place. Meanwhile, I mean, Albanese, no one knows what that guy's doing. He's a man clinging to the side of a sinking ship, and I think that this campaign is just going to be a race to see who can lose the least amount of primary vote over the next 33 days. That's what's going to end up happening. Like, neither of them are capable of, I think, getting any better. So it's just going to be to see who gets the worst, slowest, is going to decide who wins.
And really, it's so strange that it would even be this close because, like you're saying, Dutton is just a party man.
Yeah.
Albanese is somebody that rose up, through politics, sort of being quite principled in his own way. I mean, he was a bit more of a radical as a student. Apparently, I don't know if I should even repeat this, but I was reading Jim Salem's blog recently just to see what was up. And he mentioned that back in the day, Albanese and Jim almost had a fight between the two of them on campus when one was ripping down the other's posters or something like that. Anyway, I digress, but Albanese was sort of engaged in these sort of radical
Oh,
student
yeah.
protests. He wanted to fight the Tories, he wanted to fight the fascists, he wanted Israel out of Palestine, all these
Yeah,
sorts of
yeah.
things. And he
Which
rose
also
through
meant
that.
one of the
Yeah,
most
sorry.
interesting things about Albanese from back then is that also brought him into conflict with Labor left, because guys like Luke Foley, who was a really big deal in Labor left circles until his collapse over a stray hand down the back of a woman's dress, he was a huge supporter of Israel. And New South Wales had one of the stranger kind of Labor left caucuses where you actually had people on both sides of that debate. So I always criticise, just the Australian media establishment in general for the amount of attention they give to Labor, and how many more thousands and tens of thousands of words published each year about the Labor Party than the Liberal Party. But this is going to be one of the few occasions, no matter what the fallout from this election is, where that's going to be of benefit, I think, because people are going to go through this with a fine-tooth comb and look at Albanese and say, where did everything go wrong? Like this
Yeah,
should have
yeah,
been
exactly.
the Labor government to end all Labor governments. This is what the Labor rustards have been saying for a generation needed to happen, that they needed a proper Labor man, not someone brought in from the outside, not someone like kind of Kevin Rudd was, not someone with kind of controversial views that Julia Gillard had, just an establishment Labor left figure that could, lift their vote amongst working class people, who could be compassionate, who could do all these, social policies that they always say they want to do. And instead they get, a guy who's really just a cheerleader for the neoliberal policies of Jim Chalmers. So how that came about, what that looks like internally, hasn't really been ventilated yet, because to Labor's credit, like, they don't leak that much. So, yeah, I think that's going to be a really interesting thing we're going to find out after the campaign, like what was going on, like inside his cabinet room, inside his party room. Because it's just, you imagine you're sitting there, one of those Albanese supporters, and looking at the last 3 years saying, well, what did we achieve? What did we do? They just spent 3 years running on a treadmill. He's probably actually the first Labor leader that I can think of who in his first term didn't at least even, well, I mean, I guess the one thing he kind of staked his leadership on was the voice, right?
Well, that's what I was going to say, right? That seems to have been the turning point where he went from somebody with, actual big ideas, sort of, as far as that was a big idea, something
and it just
that was
completely
sort of a radical
failed.
change.
Yeah.
And at that point, he sort of just became stultified. He's hanging on the ledge for the rest of the time.
It just killed him. But I mean, again, though, I mean, it seems like such a, and I think a lot of people said this at the time, like, what a weird thing to stake your entire political career on. Like, you've just gotten elected. I mean, yeah, it was a lay down misère that he was going to get it, but he had to be the one, at the end of the relay, right? Like, to then get to that point and say, well, instead of an actual policy that I'm in control of, something transformative that I can either do or build, I'm going to put it in the hands of an electorate, 50% of which I know hate me, and try and persuade them on what was, when you think back and look at it, because, I mean, since then, we've really had this collapse in the credibility of the mainstream media. What was a really ridiculous policy, like this, this referendum on something they couldn't explain, that they couldn't say whether or not it was going to end up with like a third house of parliament. And that was what he was going to stake his entire career on. And he hasn't come up with anything else since. I mean, Julia Gillard did things like the NBN, like laid the foundation for the NDIS. That's Julia Gillard. She was there for like 18 months. And you look back and think of what she did. And she was arguably hated by more of her caucus than Anthony Albanese is. So if someone with probably conservatively 50% less support, significantly less support from the media, because there's been times I think Albo has had the News Corp press well on side, particularly on things like the hate speech laws in Israel and stuff. And she could achieve all that in 18 months. I mean, it makes you wonder to what extent is it just a skill issue, and is Anthony Albanese and his front bench just not particularly good? And what that could very well be what gets revealed in this campaign, because the last campaign was not about Anthony Albanese and his front bench's capacity to lead. The last campaign was a referendum on Scott Morrison and how much everyone hated him. So this is really the first time Albanese's kind of leadership is actually going to be tested. So yeah, we'll see what happens, I guess.
Yeah, I do have to agree. I think that you're right. He is probably going to come out with a minority government. That's the conservative guess. But I think that it would be a huge upset if Dutton won. And I think that it's a pretty significant chance that happens, that he just, of his teeth, like, skims in. I think it would have to be based on working class resentment of Albo.
Yeah.
That would be what carried him across the line. That's it.
The only kind of like technical caution I give on the, is there going to be like a surprise Dutton upset like there was in 2019 with Morrison, is the thing everyone has to remember is 19 wasn't actually an upset. 19 wasn't a surprise. 19 was just like this once in a generation polling failure, really just a maths error. And that if you adjust for it, I think it was about 18 months after the 19 election, between the Emerson report and some of the admissions made by the polling companies themselves, when people could finally figure out what went wrong, if you go back and then adjust the polls for that, Shorten opens the 2019 election significantly down on where he lands. Morrison was losing votes during that campaign. Had the campaign gone on for another couple of weeks, it probably would have been far closer. So it's a bit of a different situation now. I mean, we can only hope and assume that the polling companies don't make the same error again. And so I don't think maybe that there's that chance there that you're going to see this huge upset. Out of the 21 or so seats, I mean, I've heard recently that the Libs may be looking at just 10 that they're super focused on. But if you look at the 21 that any political strategist would tell you are kind of on the marginal borderline, it's going to be a bit hard, I think, for them to pull off, one of those like 2004 Howard upsets or like a 2013 landslide victory. Like it is going to be close just because there's so many zero-sum games in there, particularly with the Teals. One of the bigger challenges they're going to have is that the New South Wales division of the Liberals was always the squeakiest wheel on campaign funding, on directing some of the policy strategy around the seats that they cared about. And they're really not this time. I mean, at the moment, the New South Wales division of the Liberal Party is essentially run by the Victorian division as punishment for the council elections last September, where they fucked up and forgot to fill in all their forms or didn't fill in their forms on purpose, depending on who you believe. So with that in mind, I think you're going to see a lot more attention on those Victorian races, Kooyong, Goldstein in particular. That is a real zero sum for the New South Wales and the Queensland races. Not that there's many Queensland races, but particularly in New South Wales, because how you appeal to Kooyong and Goldstein is not how you're going to appeal to Reid, to these Western Suburbs seats that they really need to win. It's not even how you appeal to somewhere like Bradfield. So that's going to be a really big issue for them. The electorate's appetite for like kind of multipolar messaging in campaigns is very low. And we've seen that already with Labor being caught out going to these like Chinese community events where they, don't let in any non-native Chinese, lock the doors, and then say something completely different to them to what they're saying outside. So I think the Liberals are going to really struggle with that. They've also never really indulged in that either. I mean, I think it's only been the last 5 or 6 years the Libs have even bothered translating a lot of material. So they're not used to running a campaign where they've got to say one thing in one area and another thing in somewhere else. They generally just run the same messages. That's not going to kind of work this time, particularly down in Victoria. So that could be really interesting for them. How they communicate, a populist message one place and a kind of liberal message in some of these silvertail electorates. That's going to be a huge challenge, I think.
Yes, well, that's sort of the eternal battle for them, isn't it? Is that they think that to make up for the seats that they've lost to the Teals, they're going to have to go to the working class electorates and flip them because they're natural conservatives or whatever. They're all Indian. They're all Indian or various other, imports.
Yeah.
And they think that they're natural conservatives because back in their country, they throw gays off of roofs or whatever. And they think, so these guys are going to like Milton Friedman and they're going to like Adam Smith. They're going to realise that they're actually natural Liberal voters and flip to us. It's delusion, but it's a delusion believed by, it seems, pretty universally within the Liberals.
One thing that could benefit them, if depending on how early this kind of happens, is I do think there's a lot of discontent with the Teals anyway. I mean, particularly the people I talk to who live in a lot of those areas, like not on ideology, but just on, they made so many big promises around just grassroots politics, and this was their whole shtick, was they were going to, be for the man in the street, not the man in the high castle. And they failed to do that. They haven't really achieved much. All they seem to do is support Labor and Greens policies when they come across the floor of Parliament. So these are the same people who try to appeal to Liberal voters and then have failed to do anything particularly Liberal. Allegra Spender, for example, I think is in huge trouble in Wentworth. And the Libs could probably get that back without even really trying. Last time it came down to 400 votes in Paddington, which is like one suburb. And that's not, I mean, they make a big deal out of the Israel stuff, and there was some nervousness from the Libs around the potential for an April 12 election because that's Passover. And so there was concerns that if there was a Passover election that voter turnout in Wentworth might be really low. But, out of Wentworth has the most number of Jews in an electorate, but the Israel stuff just doesn't hurt them as much in Wentworth as you think, because even though it has the largest population of Jews, it's still not a statistically significant population. So, yeah, there's more of them there than there are in, Lindsay or even in Bradfield, but it's still not big enough to swing an election. In fact, the gay vote in that seat is probably more significant. So, and I think the Liberals probably got that cornered. So I think the Teals could find themselves in a little bit of trouble. The other thing too, for a lot of the top level Teal supporters, is this whole thing has always been about the transition from the hegemony of the coal sector in minerals and resource production and energy to the emergence of renewables and the establishment of renewables as like the new king of the ASX. And it just hasn't happened. ESG indexes are plummeting. New investment in startup renewable projects is declining, while the big companies who are leveraged still into dirty coal and things like that kind of cut their lunch and do their own projects to bring their carbon emissions down. So the change in elite business culture that was kind of anticipated by the Teal supporters, by the people who fund them through Climate 200, it never came. And I wonder to what extent that will see a decline in particularly in their financial support. I mean, the Teals spend their money really well. So I think there's a risk that if the money isn't there, their campaign really isn't there. Simon Holmes-A-Court's a pretty wealthy guy, but he's still not wealthy enough to bankroll that entire national campaign. So that could be an interesting thing that happens. We might see that emerge about the midway point, that the Teals just aren't doing as well as people may have thought. The big question, I think, is which of the minor parties will emerge as not so much the winner, but who's going to get the attention in the campaign. Will it be Trumpeter Patriots? Are they going to think of, funny enough stunts that they can get on the front page of the paper? Is it going to be Pauline Hanson? Will people respond to the more kind of cerebral alternative right politics of the Libertarians and Jared Reddick? That's the big question. What people are actually going to engage with and who's going to emerge as, candidates to watch. The Libertarians have already got really interesting candidates starting to nominate. I saw their guy, what's his last name? Elvis, the ex-MMA guy. Mm. Yeah. I saw him pop up. He's been endorsed as a candidate again.
Craig, they've got Craig as well, which I don't think is he's pretty good. He's got a bit of recognition. He's in terms of his right-wing credentials, he has mentioned the Great Replacement before. So
it's interesting. I think we have to kind of keep our expectations in check, particularly on the online right, because these guys do have to walk a really kind of narrow line. Particularly, I think which you saw a while ago with the criticism being levelled at some of the people in the alternative right-wing media space, like Rukshan, Avi Yemeni and stuff. That might agitate us quite a bit, but I don't think it crosses over into I mean, I guess the mainstream radical right that's out there, probably not hyper engaged on Twitter, not following all of this stuff online, just maybe consumes it a bit more passively. I don't think that cuts through with them, and I think there's going to be an interesting interplay between the level of aggression that the online radical right wants to see out of these guys versus what they're actually willing to do, because they've got their own bases, they've got people who support them, and they may not be willing to write them off. Craig does amazing numbers online, on Facebook in particular. He's been demonetized multiple times,
though, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's got the voice
he always
for it.
was. He was one of the earliest adopters of it too. I think it was it was before 2019. I remember going through his numbers, and they would, for back then, they were just phenomenal. Like, he was one of the most viewed Australian politicians online at the time.
Perfect personality for it. He was, I think Facebook, he was made for Facebook rather than the other.
Oh yeah. They love that stuff. And but then on the flip side, I mean, his performance last time
was a bit bad.
It was so bad, right? Maybe he was running in one
impressive.
seat, and it just might have not been a very good seat for him. So it'd be interesting to see how he goes this time. Look, and I think he's a really great libertarian candidate, just because my fear with the libertarians is that they're more cerebral, ideologically libertarian cohort come to dominate them, and we get less of like the John Ruddick populism and more of like the David Limerick open borders kind of attitude. So having Craig Kelly there is fantastic, because he's a real politic guy. Like, he's been in the Liberal Party, and I think he probably knows better than a lot of the kind of libertarian mainstream what the voting public actually want. So, yeah, he's going to be really interesting. The other kind of sleeper party to watch this time is the Sustainability Australia.
You think, really?
Yeah, I know.
Right,
people
okay.
It's eyebrow raising, right? So if you look at them over time, they make this splash years ago with a bit of money from Dick Smith. Their views have never changed. Their content has never changed. In fact, when I was looking at them in the last election, I noticed that they were using material they used 2 elections ago. Like, they were just reprinting.
That's one way to cut costs.
Yeah.
Very
but I mean, it was
of them if you think about it.
Well, exactly, yeah. But it just kind of goes to show that, like, the same problem's always been there. They did better than average in the last New South Wales election, and this time they're in Ruddick and Rennick's kind of in their kind of preference organisation. So, because not everyone can run everywhere, but Sustainability always runs everywhere. They always run a candidate in every single seat. I think you're going to see, with preferences from the Libertarians and Rennick's people, because I don't think he's going to run in anywhere near as many seats as Sustainability and the Libertarians will. I think their primary in the wash-up, I think the Sustainability primary is going to be quite a bit higher than people expect. And they're pretty, when you talk to those guys in private, like, they are right-wing guys. But the party has, and it's a kind of a smart play when you think about it, the party's just got this culture of, that they don't indulge in, the politics of population and immigration. For them, it's just this very down-the-line economic argument that they've always been making. I think having them out there making it is really helpful. And, yeah, I'm interested to see how they end up, what they kind of end up with. I think it's going to be more than 4%. And
because
I think
they're more the immigration restrictions, so I'm not opposed to seeing them rise a little bit more.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I don't know. Do they really have an appeal? I guess what they should. This is my theory. They should really become the NIMBY party, not change the name or anything, but they should be the ones that are engaging with community organisations, saying we'll represent you, so you don't get overdeveloped and your electorate doesn't go to crap. I think that would be a good idea.
One of the reasons I'm optimistic about them too is because I think that what you're going to see this election is the left, not just Labor or the Greens, but like the kind of organised left online, the activist class, etc., their cohort in the media, they're going to be going through people with a fine-tooth comb, because this is the first post-Musk X election, right? I think everyone kind of forgets that. Musk had not really put in a lot of the big reforms that have made X what it is today at the last federal election. They've all come in since. And the massive change in culture on that app has really only happened in the last 2.5 years. So you've got all these guys who've kind of been running as very like down the line, button down candidates for minor parties in the last few elections. They're now on X and they're like following Captive Dreamer and they're like retweeting the dumbest things I say. I think that you're going to have this, in the same way that every campaign has that one kind of like dirty yarn that won't go away, whether it's like someone telling jokes on Facebook or whatever. I think this time round, it's going to be that. It's going to be they're going to be going through their posts, going through like who they've boosted online. Thankfully, you can't see likes anymore. Then kind of like looking at guys through that lens. And that's one of the cool things about Sustainability Australia is that they just don't have that. I mean, no one can even name one of their candidates and they're not really engaged online. But they do have this incredible ability to man booths, to staff campaigns that, even to an extent the Liberal Party don't do. Like in the last election, I was driving between booths helping a friend, and I kept going to booths where like the Greens and Labor were trying to convince the sustainability guys that it was like a racist party to get them off the booth because there were so many people there. They hire them, they save their money, and because they don't put up core flutes and things. And just so they can always have the booths manned, always be putting out how to vote cards. And that's their entire campaign strategy. So
it's sort of just rolling the dice every time and hoping one of them, will come up as favourable.
Well, it's all about the upper house. I mean, they've never once had a lower house candidate, I think, get over 3% or so. But yeah, they have had, and they actually have never gotten within half a quota in the Senate. But yeah, I just think that could be changing this time, just particularly because immigration is such a big issue. But I mean, their attitude towards it is going to be a bit of a struggle. Whereas, when you've got particularly with guys like Rennick, who are quite a bit more erudite and, able to carry on a debate about it, I think that he's obviously going to get a lot of people's first preferences. Rennick's definitely the most exciting candidate, I think.
By far, yeah.
Yeah, he's the one everyone's pumped for because the more people get exposed to Rennick, the more people kind of scratch their head and go, actually, I don't mind that guy. I like what he's saying. And he has a way of doing it too, which, he doesn't kind of make a caricature of himself, doesn't kind of turn himself into a joke like Babbitt does and like, Antic and the Liberals did. He does treat it extremely seriously. And
He's an accountant. What do you expect?
I wish I could like sneak into his house at night and just like I don't know, inject something into his throat to make his voice deeper. I think that's like the only thing. If I could just do one thing.
The other thing is I've seen him smile once. I think the entire campaign so far. He's very, very, like you said, buttoned down, very serious. And in some ways, it's kind of it's sort of refreshing because it's like this is what a politician might have looked like. This would have been one of Menzies MPs back in the day.
Exactly.
He's been time travel to now.
And it I think that's, I mean, Australia is not America. And that's why all this like nonsense about, who's going to be our Trump is kind of redundant. Like we are our own country and, where people from the hard right have been successful in Australia before is when they are serious. And it's the same in the UK. I mean, Enoch Powell did not crack jokes. Like he didn't make a joke out of the situation. I mean, so I think Rennick, he's definitely one of those guys, like one of those more kind of serious people that people might resonate with. Because if you're out there and you're doing it tough, you don't want jokes, you don't want memes, you want someone to treat it seriously with the seriousness it deserves. So. Yeah, I think Rennick's going to do really well. I mean, the unfortunate thing about Rennick is that his party infrastructure is small. I think it's extremely unlikely he's going to get a lot of money Although, like anyone I'm talking to who's on the fence about donating, I say, you look, call Jared Rennick. Like if you're of the right and you have spare money and you want to donate to the campaigns, everyone else has got a donation base except Rennick, and so I think that's where the bulk of the money should go. I mean, he's definitely the guy I'll hand out for a booth on polling day, but. That's going to be his only struggle. I mean, I think I said on a podcast the other day, like, campaign finance is the square root of money, manpower, and time. Labor have reduced everyone's time, so everyone's got the same amount of time, 33 days. No one's been getting ready for this properly. The money situation overwhelmingly benefits the major parties who are both going into this with $90 million war chests. And then manpower is really the only thing any of us can contribute in a meaningful way. So the only kind of interesting thing about the money is that every indication is that the major parties are intent on wasting theirs. And when you look at the content they're producing, when you look at how they signal boost it, it's clear to me that $90 million is really just $60 million. It's probably a third of their money they're wasting. I mean, they're churning out core flutes like that's the main piece of campaign collateral when no one cares anymore. No one can even knows who these people are. So, and a lot of them look disgusting. Like, why would you vote for some of them? So putting their faces on the sides of buses and on trucks just doesn't seem like that good of an idea to me. But yeah, so they are wasting a lot of money, but they've still got quite a bit more than the other candidates. So that's going to be a big struggle for them. One of the final interesting things about the campaign is going to be what happens with the Greens, and whether or not I think there's a real risk this campaign that the Greens vote is just going to tank. It is going to absolutely tank. And particularly in Victoria, you're going to see a surge in support for the Socialist Alternative or Socialist Alliance, whatever they're called. Because the Greens have been walking this very thin line for so long on, presenting themselves as a serious, progressive, left-wing alternative and being a joke university activist party that's principally fascinated with Palestine and trans rights and whatever, and missing a lot of the working class activism in the middle. And I think they could really be punished for that at this election. Like, especially when you've got, the guys from the Socialist Alliance have been in field training with all this pro-Palestine crap they've been going on with. They've got huge engagement on the university campuses. They only need to pull 0.5% away from the Greens in every seat they run in, and it'll be one of the Greens' worst elections in history. So I think that could be interesting. And, no one's going to let the Greens forget what's her name? The crazy one, the Aboriginal one.
Lydia Thorpe.
What's the Senator?
Thorpe?
Lydia Thorpe. Yeah. I mean, yeah. No one's going to let them forget the kind of like error of judgment with her. But at the same time, like people like Max Chandler, Mathers, and Bant just don't resonate with left-wing voters. David Shoebridge does a really good job in the upper house, but he's again like a kind of dude in a suit who's centrally occupied with national security and his work on committees. He's not going to win an election for you. They really don't have anyone that I think the public just immediately resonates with. Maybe Sarah Hanson-Young amongst a certain cohort, but it's not an election-winning cohort. So, yeah, I think what happens to the Greens could be quite interesting, especially for Labor. Like, the reduction in the Greens' vote is really the Liberals' only pathway to victory, I think. Because if they're not in the final two-party splits in a lot of seats, the Liberals could coast in on preferences from One Nation, Trumpeter Patriots, like they did in a lot of seats in 2019. But I just don't think they have much control over it, unfortunately. Even though they've been running these campaigns trying to drive down their vote, at the end of the day, no person contemplating voting for the Greens is going to have their mind changed by an Advance Australia billboard.
Yeah, well, they're not exactly presenting erudite arguments in those billboards anyway. It's just,
No.
yeah, it's
Interestingly,
just fear mongering.
it seems like in the last 24 hours, they've significantly changed their strategy. And I'm told that some of those billboards the Greens ones have been coming down and they're being replaced with migration billboards and ones about
Interesting.
the ute taxes. They're
Oh,
going
of
for the ute
course, they're
tax
back with
article.
the ute taxes again.
Yeah.
Jeez. Well, at least migration is being mentioned.
The problem with these guys is, and I've been noticing this for years, but it's because when you get a bunch of young liberals in a room to design a campaign who have no experience of working class people and working class culture, you end up with saying, "Oh, well, we'll just do a campaign about the Utes." I mean, they like Utes, right? Like it's like a bunch of gay guys in a room talking about football or something. Like it's not.
Yeah.
It's so disconnected from the reality. I mean, I think I said this on Buckingham's podcast that COVID is the most transformative thing that ever happened to right-wing politics globally, because it meant all these guys who were spending the most significant part of their life either trapped in offices or on work sites had time to do something that they'd always wanted to do, which was read. And with that cohort of working class to lower middle class right-wing men are not stupid. They're not solely occupied with VB, NFL, NRL, and the price of a Ford Raptor. These are people who are sitting there reading Bronze Age Mindset, who are interested in seed oils and stuff like that, who've been getting into this stuff over the last couple of years. And so I think treating them like bogans and doing like the bogan campaign pitch, it's way off the mark, and I don't think it's going to work.
Well, I don't know if you can, on one hand, criticize the gay guys, in the advanced campaign, and then say Bronze Age mindset is the solution. I see a little bit of a contradiction there, but
Yeah.
I won't press it too much because some of my best friends are Baptists.
Yeah, I mean, that's just an example. I'm sure they've moved on from that since. I mean, I'm not saying they're all sitting there like reading Carl Schmitt now, but they're probably, everyone had to start somewhere, right?
Yeah, no, I suppose you're right.
I started with Mike Marr. I was cooler.
Yeah, well, yeah, that is a little bit better. But I suppose we went from magnets in your bloodstream being injected by Bill Gates, and now now they're watching John MacGowan on Into the Weeds. But we're approaching the end of the episode here. I just wanted to get your thoughts, and we'll wrap it up here. What do you think of the Australia First Alliance idea? This is sort of a revolutionary breakthrough, I think, in terms of minor right-wing politics. Even though it's in its infancy, I would like to see it develop more, and I think it has strong potential. What do you think of it? Do you think it's a gimmick? Do you think it will eventuate with anything tangible? Will this win more seats?
Yeah, well, it might do. I mean, there's no such thing as gimmicks in politics because at the end of the day, like everything's a gimmick. It's just some of them work. So if it works, how much of there are all these question marks about how these things actually work once the votes get tallied, and that's actually why Glenn Drury is a really interesting person to talk to about that stuff. But if it works, it's fantastic. If it doesn't, I mean, you don't lose anything. Like, I mean, that's the good thing about projects like this is they can't really fail. Like, all they can just do is go nowhere. So, you should always be doing something. You should always be trying to do something. So, yeah, I support it on those grounds. I mean, plus Australia First, just as a brand, I think. I mean,
it's a great name. It's excellent, isn't it?
And it's kind of it stretches all the way back through like every incarnation of right-wing reactionaryism that we've ever had in Australia. And
Percy Stephenson rise from the grave, and everyone will see that he was right.
Through to like Campbell and Salim even used the name at one point. So I support. I definitely support it. Look, the thing that I think what this election is going to do is provide like a roadmap for everyone going forward. Like, I think whatever happens, particularly with something like a project like Trumpets are Patriots, like however badly that goes, it's going to finally put to bed like the idea that you can just kind of run the shell of a nationalist campaign. Like, it's going to send a clear message to whoever comes next that, no, you actually need actual nationalists to pull this off, and all the money in the world won't change that. It'll finally, I think, put the bullet into One Nation. I don't think One Nation are going to do particularly well, and I don't think they're going to be able to come back from it. And with Hanson surely having to retire soon, I think, that final kind of albatross around the neck of Australia's right will finally be taken off. And then, we'll get to pick apart the performance of Rennick, of the Libertarians, and say, well, what worked and what didn't, and what do we take forward into the future? And so, yeah, I think it's going to be an important campaign to just watch really closely and watch what works, watch what doesn't, because this is going to be the lessons for next time, when hopefully we have a serious alternative that actually has a chance of winning.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, John. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you for joining us this week. It was great to have you on. Your commentary is always very enlightening. And
Thanks,
I'll throw it back to you. Where would you like to link people to find more of your content?
It's always on Twitter. It's the only place it's the only app I always remember to install on my many burner phones. So at John_MacGowan, and you can see my unhinged takes, at least 2 a day.
Oh, they're very entertaining. It's great. It's so funny because, all sides of politics can sort of agree that you're one of the most interesting voices in Australian politics at the moment. And
I
of
don't
course,
try. I've always been.
You come from the right.
So, yeah.
It's naturally, you woke up this way.
I'm mellowing. No. I do find myself mellowing a lot, though. Like, I'm worried that as I get older, I'm getting slowly more left wing. So yeah, I've got to keep revisiting the sacred texts just to remind myself, because especially when the Liberals are so bad in this country, it's easy to just kind of flip the other way. I found myself talking to some Greens guys on Twitter the other day about their defence policy that they just announced, and after a couple of posts of defending the Greens' credibility on national security, I just logged off for the day. I thought, I'm done. I can't keep doing this.
No, well, look, you play all sides, that you always come out on top, and that's it's a strategy we can all learn from. But no, thank you, and have a great rest of your week, John.
Cheers, mate. See ya.